I would like to tell you about a wonderful trip I took to Cuba in February 2013. I was part of a mission of 32 people who brought badly needed supplies to the Jewish community on this island nation. This was truly a very rewarding experience. There has been a Jewish community in Cuba for centuries. I gave several presentations about my trip at synagogues throughout the Miami-Dade and Broward County areas. Many people who were not there and were not able to attend asked me if I would put the presentation online. I've done so in this video. I recommend, however, that you go to my site at www.hsorkin.com/travel/Cuba and view the online presentation so you can get a much richer and fuller appreciation of the trip. There is much more online than is covered in this video. On February 8, 2013, I had the thrill of attending Shabbat services at Havana's Casa de la Comunidad Hebraica de Cuba, Beth Shalom, or better known as El Patronato Synagogue. The synagogue holds about 400 people, and the place was packed. El Patronato is one of two active synagogues in Havana, the other being Centro Hebreo Sephardi de Cuba, which is also called the Sephardic Center. Both synagogues, and the two that I visited in two other cities, are supported by whatever their members could afford, but none could exist without the help of foreign groups like the one that I was with. Although the Patronato was filled on the Shabbat evening of February 8th, many of the attendees were from other groups that were there on the same type of mission that I was on. My particular group brought thousands of dollars worth of cash, drugs, clothing, religious articles, and anything else you could think of to the Jewish communities of Cuba. All the items that were brought were collected by each of us individually. My personal doctors were wonderful and gave me literally thousands of prescription drugs. Nearly 3/4 of one of my very large suitcases was filled entirely with the badly needed drugs. With all the items I brought in my other suitcases, I wound up paying $80 in overweight charges. But for a cause like this, it was well worth the price. One of the people in my group brought his bar mitzvah tallis with him and gave it to the mother of a 10-year-old boy, so when the boy becomes a bar mitzvah, he will have a tallis. I wish I would have thought of that, since I still have my bar mitzvah tallis, and even though I am still the same size, and many of you who know me will probably be shaking your head yes, I'm not using my bar mitzvah tallis anymore. There are neither rabbis nor moyals in Cuba. Services are lay-led. However, throughout the year, there are visiting rabbis and moyals from South America who come for periods of time to serve the Patronato. Most of them come from Argentina, which has the largest Jewish population in South America, and some from Venezuela, where the Jewish population has dwindled in recent years. In Venezuela, there are tensions between the government and the Jewish community, and much as half of the Jews in Venezuela have emigrated. When Chavez took power in 1999, there were approximately 22,000 Jews in Venezuela. Today, that number is between 9,500 and 14,000. Our Shabbat service was conducted by a rabbi from Buenos Aires and a cantorial soloist who was part of the congregation. The service was beautiful, especially with all of the 400-plus people in attendance singing along. There were not enough sitters for everyone, and not everyone had the same sitter, since they were donated by congregations from Argentina, Venezuela, and Mexico. But most people managed to follow. It was particularly strange for me to see one side of the page in Hebrew and the other side in Spanish with Spanish transliteration. For example, the word Baruch is spelled B-A-R-U-J. After services, my group was the only one that joined the congregants for Shabbat dinner. The synagogue feeds their members a Shabbat meal at no cost to them. This helps the people of the congregation in allocating their other food needs for the week. Food is not plentiful in Cuba, and there are two ways in which the people can get their food. More about that later. I was privileged to be sitting next to a neurosurgeon and his wife, who was a nurse in the hospital where the doctor practices. He told me that between him and his wife, they make $54 a week. The average salary in Cuba is about $30 per week. The person sweeping the streets makes about the same money as a skilled surgeon. I asked the doctor, why would he put himself through so many years of study to become a neurosurgeon when he could be making the same money doing something that would not have required so much struggling? He took his hand to his heart and said to me, because I love people and I want to help them. At this point I knew he really meant it. He certainly is not doing this for the money. The hospitals in Cuba are set up differently than in the US. In Cuba, each hospital specializes in a specific ailment. In other words, there's a cardiac hospital, a neurology hospital, an orthopedic hospital, etc. My doctor friend told me that the hospitals are very well equipped. The doctors and the care are excellent. However, what they do not have are the drugs to treat their patients. He expressed how frustrating it was to him to see his patients suffering and not being able to give them their medication. This is all the more reason I felt so good about bringing so many prescription drugs with me. The Patronato houses a Jewish drug dispensary where we dropped off many bags of drugs. Every person in my group sincerely brought suitcases full of supplies, including clothing as well. The Shabbat service was not our first visit to the Patronato. Soon after we arrived in Cuba, even before we went to our hotel, we were taken to meet with probably the most prominent and influential Jew in Cuba, president of the Patronato Synagogue and liaison to the Castro government, Adela Dworkin. She sat and talked to us for about half an hour and graciously answered all the many questions we were throwing at her. We asked her about the future of the Jewish community, and she told us that she was optimistic. In 1992, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Cuba changed its constitution allowing for religious freedom. When that occurred, the Canadian Jewish community began sending kosher for Passover foods to the congregation, which it is still doing. When word got around about the distribution of the food and people came for their allotment, the congregation encouraged them to come back for Shabbat and various holiday celebrations. Within 10 years, a growing number of activities were established, including a Sunday school where children ages 6 through 14 learn Jewish culture and tradition. This Sunday school has been very successful. Many of the children sang and participated in our Shabbat service, and they give hope, at least in part, for the future of the Jewish community. The service was also very well attended by members of the congregation. The Patronato was remodeled about 15 years ago, all financed by Jews from the US, Canada, and other countries. The decor is modern, with an elaborate entrance marked by a giant arch and gold religious symbols etched in the front door. The ark is made of dark wood and marble, and the seats of velour. The facilities do not reflect the economic standing of its members. Cuba's Jewish community is one of the poorest in the world. During our meeting with Adela, she prefers to be called by her first name, also told us about her close relationship with Fidel Castro. She had the opportunity to meet with Fidel in 1998 and asked him why he never visited the Jewish community. He replied, "Because I was never invited." She promptly invited him to an upcoming Hanukkah celebration. When Fidel asked what Hanukkah was, Adela explained that the holiday celebrates the revolution, a word Castro likes, the revolution of the Jewish people. Hanukkah came and so did Fidel. He showed up at a party of 200 people, sat next to her in the front row, and addressed the congregation in one of his famous lengthy speeches. Adela's close relationship with the Castros has also allowed her to be one of the very few people who are permitted to visit Alan Gross, an American Jew from Boca Raton who was prosecuted in 2011 after being accused of crimes against the Cuban state for bringing satellite phones and computer equipment to members of Cuba's Jewish community without the permit required under the Cuban law. In 2009, he was arrested while in Cuba working as a U.S. government subcontractor for the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. He was convicted for acts against the independence or territorial integrity of the state and is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence in Cuba. Several U.S. congresspeople as well as former Secretary of State Clinton have visited Cuba to try to convince the Cuban government to free Mr. Gross, but these attempts have been unsuccessful. Adela visits him regularly to update him on what's being done to help him as well as to cheer him up. On Shabbat morning, February 9th, we attended services at the other synagogue in Havana, the Centro Hebreo Sephardi, the Sephardic Center. The services were conducted in a fashion that had no congregational participation. Basically, there was a lay reader who davened at the bima. Personally, I do not see how this would be attractive to younger people. Even though this is supposed to be a Sephardic synagogue, its members are from both. There actually is no rivalry or competition between the Sephardic Center and the Patronato. The Patronato emphasizes youth services, houses a large library and the pharmacy. The Sephardic Center houses the Mitriani Senior Center, which was established in 2011. Myra Levy, the president of the Senior Center, told us that the center helps meet the needs of elderly members of the community by providing a range of workshops including exercise, art, and ceramics. This is where I bought a challah cover for my synagogue. Meals are provided, and there's also help for the seniors to meet their emotional, psychological, social, and medical needs. The seniors receive a pension of approximately $12 a month and spend 80% of their income on food. Many are without a support network because family members have made aliyah. The Sephardic Center also houses the first permanent exhibit about the Holocaust, as well as an exhibition on the settling, decline, and rebirth of the Jewish community in Cuba. Much to my surprise and delight, I learned that there is no anti-Semitism in Cuba. The synagogues are wide open, and anyone can enter at any time. I'm sure all of you who have visited synagogues and other Jewish sites around the world are very familiar with the high security measures that are taken: fences, cameras, guards. This is not the case in Cuba. After the revolution in 1959, the government took over all private businesses. There are only two businesses that were allowed to remain private. One is the only kosher butcher in the country, and the other one is, guess, Chinese restaurants. Beef, which is very scarce, disappeared from state-owned grocery stores after the 1991 collapse of Cuba's old economic partner, the former Soviet Union. It is very expensive, but is available at Cook stores. Cook, C-U-C, is the Cuban convertible peso, one of the two currencies that are used in the country. I will tell you more about this later. Cook stores cater to foreigners and tourists, although if a Cuban has Cooks, he or she may shop at any of these stores. Of course, kosher meat is not available at the Cook stores, but Manischewitz wine is for some reason. The 50-plus-year-old kosher butcher still survives. The meat here is sold only in pesos, the other currency in which all Cubans are paid. Each person is only allowed to buy their monthly quota of 2 pounds of meat per person. The shop sells only meat, which it receives about 3 times a month. On meat days, shoppers are let into the store just a few at a time. They must bring their own plastic bags. A big floor fan circulates hot air and chases away the flies. Butchers chop thick chunks on a wooden board or grind the meat by hand. The question I get asked the most is, how many Jews are there in Cuba? The answer is approximately 1,500, most of whom live in Havana. A map of the distribution of the Jewish population and or Jewish sites was on the wall as Adela spoke to us. We visited many of these sites. Our first stop out of Havana was the city of Santa Clara. We also visited Cienfuegos. You could see on the map where the two cities that we visited are situated. The 40-member Jewish community of Santa Clara, the capital city of central Villa Clara province, has raised enough money to buy a 2-story house and convert it into a synagogue and community center. It is beautifully done with a small sanctuary, kitchen, recreation room, and rooftop gathering area with a spectacular tile wall which runs the entire length of the roof, showing a view of Jerusalem looking down into the city. The congregation takes great pride in maintaining their very old Jewish cemetery. And also in 2003, erecting their Holocaust memorial, one of 2 in Cuba, located to the left as one enters the cemetery. The memorial includes a stone from the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, and in front of the memorial is a path made of stones from the Warsaw Ghetto, which emulate railroad tracks and climb up the memorial stone. These tracks represent the railroad tracks that brought the Jews to the concentration camps and eventually to their death. David Tacha, on the right, is the president of Comunidad Tikkun Olam, a small Santa Clara congregation. He is not as optimistic as Adela when it comes to the future of the Jews in Cuba under the present regime. He told us that before the revolution took hold, there were 15,000 Jews in Cuba, and 90% of them flew the island by 1959. Presently, any Cuban Jew is permitted to make Aliyah to Israel, and many have done so. 50% of those who do make Aliyah use this as a stepping stone to come to America, and many of them wind up in Miami. Those who are choosing to stay in Cuba are doing so because of close family ties or financial hardships. He also told us that many people have come to him claiming that they are Jews and are trying to use this as an escape mechanism to get out of Cuba. Since he basically knows all the Jews in the area, he has to turn these people away, and sometimes this turns into an ugly and very challenging situation for him. He's hoping that the end of the present regime and future economic prosperity will bring new life to the Jewish community. I agree and will give you my opinion and impression of this later. After visiting with Mr. Tacha, we moved on to the city of Cienfuegos. Within this beautiful city, a small and vibrant community of about 40 people is practicing their Judaism. Rebecca Langus, a school teacher, is the community's leader, and the front room of her second-floor apartment, the house has only 2 floors, is the center of the Jewish community in Cienfuegos. She shares this apartment with her husband Ramon and her 2 sons David and Danielito. Danielito is to her right. People come here for services, to study Hebrew and Jewish history, and to read the religious texts and other books that Jews from all over the world have donated. Her son is an artist. We visited his gallery while in Cienfuegos, and several of the people in my group bought some of his works. Rebecca told us, when you are few, there is a responsibility to keep traditions. Educating the children is the only way to keep the community alive. She tells visitors about how pleased she is to be able to practice her Jewish faith and about the challenges the community faces, including the need for medicine and basic necessities of daily life, such as toiletries and underwear, the lack of books about Jewish life, Hebrew religious texts, and the substandard housing. She actually is fortunate to be living in such a nice apartment. This was a long and yet very fulfilling day for all of us, since we once again had bundles of supplies which we happily donated to both of these communities. The day ended beautifully with our settling into a lovely and picturesque hotel on the bay and a sunset cruise with an open bar. Our donations were not solely directed towards Jewish groups. The next day we visited an at-risk pregnancy clinic where we donated bundles of baby and grooming supplies, shampoos, skin creams, etc., hopefully making the life a little bit easier for those women who live there. We then drove on to Trinidad, a city southeast of Cienfuegos. Trinidad is known for its craft market and hundreds of artists selling everything from clothing to paintings. It was a lot of fun walking through the streets and enjoying the ambiance. After spending 2 days in the Cienfuegos, Trinidad area, we headed back to Havana, stopping at Hemingway's home, La Finca Vigia, located on a mountainside about 15 miles from Havana. The view from Hemingway's house is breathtaking, with a fabulous vista of all of Havana and the ocean. We then headed for Guanabacoa, a town about 12 miles east of Havana. The Jewish community has 2 cemeteries in Guanabacoa. The Cementerio de la Unión Hebrea Chavet Achim for the Sephardic Jews, and the Cementerio de la Comunidad Religiosa Hebrea Dat Israel for the Ashkenazi. It was founded in 1906 and is also called the United Hebrew Congregation Cemetery. People enter the cemetery by walking under a Spanish colonial gate with the Star of David that was erected in 1910. As you enter, to the left of the gate is a small memorial to the Holocaust. The inscription on the memorial is, "Honoring the Memory." In this place is buried various pieces of soap made from the fat of Jews, part of the 6 million who were victims of the barbaric Nazi occupation that occurred in the 20th century. Rest in peace. Knowing what is buried there really shocked me, and it still does. We all said Kaddish in front of the memorial at this cemetery, and the one in Santa Clara as well. At this point, we have basically completed our mission. All the hundreds of bags of supplies were delivered to their designated recipients. It is now time to discover more of this amazing country. After our visit to the cemetery, we visited a typical food market. Food in these markets can only be paid for using Cuban pesos. The variety of food is minimal and the quality is poor, but it's cheap. This is the food that most people eat unless they obtain cooks, the money that can be used to buy better quality items. The shelves are often half empty, as you can see from the picture. People lucky enough to have relatives in other countries that send them money or have ways of getting extra money definitely have a great advantage. One of the reasons there is such a scarcity of food is the lack of incentive. A farmer is paid the same amount of money whether he or she produces a crop of 1 acre or 10 acres. Why break your back if you get paid the same no matter how much you produce? Can you believe that Cuba, a country that was once the biggest exporter of sugar in the world, is now importing sugar? Their production is only 1/5 of their pre-revolution output. We ate our meals in the country's better restaurants. We had breakfast each morning at our hotel's breakfast buffet, which could compare with many top buffets in the US. The dinners and lunches were, well, good to very good, not comparable to the same type of restaurants you would find in the US, Canada, or Europe. The size of the portions were about 1/2 to 2/3 of what we are accustomed to. This may be a good thing. Green lettuces, for the most part, do not exist. A typical salad consists of shredded green cabbage, a few slices of tomato, and a few slices of cucumber. The average price of an entree in the better restaurants is around $15. Something comparable in the US would be at least $25. A bargain for us, yes, but if you're making only $30 a week, this is completely out of range. Every lunch and dinner was accompanied by a quartet of musicians playing music that they think tourists would like. If I hear Guantanamero one more time, I think I will bust. After the musicians finished their set, they came around to collect gratuities and sell their CDs. This helps them make the extra money that they really need. One great thing about the Cuban government is their support for the arts. If a child has a passion for any of the arts, fine arts, music, dance, theater, etc., they can go to special schools, follow their zeal, and be assured that they will not starve. Everyone in Cuba has a place to live. There are no homeless people there. Is this good or bad? It depends upon how you view this. Cuban's architecture is a photographer's paradise. The buildings are spectacular. Every building is more beautiful than the next. The only problem is they're crumbling. When the wealthy fled the country before the revolution, they left behind their vacant homes. The poor then moved in, dividing these buildings first in half, then in fourths, then in 16th, and so forth. What used to be magnificent 3- and 4-story mansions are now home to 40 or 50 families. Some families are living several generations in one room. We visited with some of these people, and curiously, they seem to be happy people. They live very poorly, but at least they have a home. Music is heard everywhere you go. The government is now waking up to the critically deteriorating conditions and has started renovation projects gutting the insides of these buildings while maintaining the striking exteriors. Much of this is happening in the revitalization of Old Havana. Here is a before and after picture of one of the buildings. People are now able to own their own real estate. They just have to have the money to buy it and keep it up. They're letting families that first settled in the houses to remain and are resettling the others. This, of course, is a major undertaking, and it has only recently begun. So what about those who can afford to buy their own home and better luxury items? There was a Cook Mall across the street from my hotel in Havana. I saw refrigerators there for $2,500. Where are people getting the money from if they only make $30 a week? We were told that many people hold more than one job. Also, people are now allowed to open their own private businesses or provide services for money. One example that comes to mind is what I did years ago to make extra money, and that was to tutor. Another example that I saw right in front of me was our tour guide and driver. Their basic salary, once again, is equivalent to $30 a week. We were advised to tip the tour guide a minimum of 25 kooks and the driver a minimum of 15 kooks. With 32 people on the tour, that makes 800 kooks for the tour guide and 480 kooks for the driver. Many people gave more. The kook is almost on par with the dollar. So $800 a week, which if he works 50 weeks a year, is $40,000 a year. Not bad. Remember, many everyday items cost about half of what you would pay in the U.S., and healthcare and education is free. So the $40,000 is probably the same as earning perhaps $70,000 in the U.S. On my website, I have a cost of living comparison between Havana and Fort Lauderdale. You might want to take a look at that. How can I speak about Cuba without talking about the unbelievable late 1940 and 1950 vintage cars? They're all over the place. I could not stop taking pictures of them. I found every car I was looking for except a 1950 Hudson, which was our family car when I was a kid. So what's next for Cuba and the Cuban people? In my opinion, Cuba is like a throbbing balloon ready to burst. And when it does, there will be an influx of investment to the likes not seen in decades. It will turn Cuba around and make it one of the great showcases of the world. Prosperity will come, and so will the Jews, who will be instrumental in helping to revitalize and rejuvenate Cuba and the Cuban Jewish community. In talking with the people, they are optimistically looking at some kind of a breakthrough in 2 years. Fidel is now 86, and Raul, who is 81, says that this will be his last 5-year term. Who will take over after Raul is out of office is, of course, a great determining factor. How will the death of Hugo Chavez affect the future of Cuba? Venezuela has been trading oil with Cuba for its medical care. They have established a barter system. There are many Venezuelans who come to Cuba for medical treatment, and Cuba sends its doctors to Venezuela as well. Now that Chavez is gone, will this relationship end? The second largest boat lift in Cuba came in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed and left Cuba. Can Chavez's death mean the end of Venezuelans' aid to Cuba? What are the ramifications of this? Could it be the catalyst that might push Cuba into a new age? This remains to be seen. I'm really looking forward to returning to Cuba in a few years and seeing a booming new prosperity and revitalized Jewish community. When I travel, I put things into 3 categories. 1, don't go. 2, go once. 3, a must go back to many times. Cuba definitely falls into category 3. Thank you.